as my bio says, I am Simon Squibb and I'm the CEO of an investment company here called Nest that I started 4 years ago. I've actually been in Hong Kong 18 years. I originally came here as a tax dodge, don't tell the government. I sold a company in the UK and they told me if I came to Hong Kong for 9 months I wouldn't need to pay tax on that sale. So I originally came out here for that, and then the entrepreneur in me couldn't stop myself from starting a company, so I started quite a few companies, and one of them is quite famous here called Fluid. It's a creative agency. And 4 years ago I decided full-time to dedicate myself to investing in startups, and so far myself and my firm we've invested in 46 companies. Today, however, I want to try and give you something a little bit different, something that perhaps you won't read in a textbook, something that I think only an entrepreneur that's been through it can give you. So I think it's interesting when you look at these points on the wall and what you guys are going to talk about, but something that perhaps is in between the lines on these points is, what is the purpose of life? Right? What is your purpose? And so just out of interest, who knows the answer to the purpose of life? Well, then I might be able to help you with this today. It's a big ask, right? But let's see if I can just quickly help you with this, which I think will help you with these 4 points. So without going on about it too much, just this is basically how we pitch my firm. A lot of people like to call themselves VCs, angel investors, all sounds pretty cool. But the way I see us, our firm, is we're really talent scouting. So if you think about sports stars and how they have an agent and have representation, they help them train, they help them think about the right deals, help them think about the right relationships. In business, I feel that there's always been a gap in that space for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are also like athletes. You have to work hard to be successful, just like an athlete. And so, and you need guidance on everything from what you should eat to who you should be doing partnerships with. So we see ourselves actually more like talent scouting people. We're looking for people that we can invest in, people that we can back, just as sports stars have agents. One of the big things I believe in, I think whenever people give you these talks, one of the things you've probably got to get to understand is the person and where they come from, right? Because everyone has a different background and therefore a different opinion on what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. I really believe that certain industries need disrupting. So for example, in my opinion, banking. You look at things like Napster that disrupted the music industry. I mean, music industry is quite sweet, right? I mean, it's not, but it gets disrupted, and because they're overcharging a little bit, although, they're charging for things that artists work hard for. But in banking, you think about it, they think about the banking industry and how it's turned out. It turns out that the top 1% want all the money, and actually they're not giving money to young businesses anymore. They're not helping startups anymore. You go to a bank today and ask them for a loan for your startup. They'll want your house as collateral. So what do you do if you haven't got a house? One of the areas that I believe is going to be big in the future, and mark my words, equity crowdfunding. So right now you've probably heard of crowdfunding, which is Kickstarter and those types of organizations. In the future it's going to be equity crowdfunding, which is where peer-to-peer lending comes into play. So this sort of industry is also going to disrupt me. It's where people will be able to raise money online for their ideas. It's starting to happen already, but it's just going to get bigger. Eventually banks will be obsolete. So it's always interesting to do surveys and ask people questions, but I think it's also dangerous. This is just for fun. I don't know if you guys know, this is David Cameron. He's the Prime Minister of England, the leader of the Conservative Party, and he's up for re-election. So he was doing a survey of people like you, young people, and what they need to vote for him, what they need to know and hear, and what their dreams are for the future from young people. One of the pieces of research that came back from that study was that young people today only believe what they see in a picture. If they don't see it in a picture, they don't believe it's really happened. So the Conservative Party took this research and started applying it. So what did David Cameron start doing? He started doing selfies of himself doing things. And this is him with a selfie of him on the phone to Barack Obama sorting out the Ukraine crisis, right? So very serious. But this is where research can backfire, because this then went viral. And everyone started tweeting that they were patching into Barack Obama. So you've got to be very careful with research. But I'm interested in the room. Who in the room is on LinkedIn? Put up your hand. Who in the room is on Twitter? Are you young people or what? Who in the room is on Facebook? Okay, good. Who in the room is on Weibo? Okay. Interesting, just from my own insight. Okay, so also belief systems are very important. Our subconscious, by the way, is our most powerful tool. Our subconscious makes us breathe right now. Our subconscious makes your knee jump up and down. Our subconscious makes, now stopped it consciously. Our subconscious actually controls a lot of things that we don't even realize. Our fears, especially when it comes to taking risks, it plays on our mind and we don't even know why. Why some people are scared of spiders? You know, there's sometimes no logic to it. But one of the things I believe in my subconscious and in my conscious mind is this: culture will always beat strategy. So in business schools, quite often you see people taught about business planning, and it's important. I'm not saying don't do a business plan or don't plan your business, but I'm saying in the end it's about culture. It's about that pushing yourself one more mile, just like an athlete. And so culture is everything. If you look at the successful companies, this is the trait that makes them all common in their success story. So who knows what this is?
A house.
So close.
Okay. Garage.
Exactly, a garage. Not hard, is it? It's a garage. Some people in Hong Kong haven't seen a garage, but it's a garage. But it's not just any old garage. Anyone know why this garage is special?
Steve Jobs.
No, but close, very close. Also close. Also close. Okay.
Your garage. You.
Not my garage. This is the garage where the Google guys started. This is the actual garage where they started. And it's absolutely fascinating. One of the things, when I decided 4 years ago to full-time focus on investing in startups, I had the chance to go around the world and visit different hubs of where startups get invested, to decide whether or not I was going to do it in Hong Kong and see what the market was like. But one of the things I did intensely was study the success stories and the failures in business. And I really wanted to understand, what is it that made Google so successful? Initially, I look at it from, okay, so, you know, they raise money, their idea, their investors, the team, you know, what was it? You know, and I looked at all the fundamentals. And then I discovered something I think you guys will never read in a book, and maybe you can take this with you for the rest of your life and leverage it. So here's these two guys. They go into a garage and they start a business. And you can argue those two young guys had nothing to lose, right? Go into the garage and start a business. And then you watch them grow the business, and this is the bit that's fascinating about this. So these guys go and build this business. Nothing to lose, build it up. There's a point in their history. Right now, they're a $400 billion company today. So you take HSBC, Bank of America, Standard Charter, you put them all together, they're still not the market cap of this company. This is an incredible business. But when they were at a $212 billion market cap, so this isn't that long ago, and that is now a big business, and that is a business that has something to lose. The founders of this company call everyone into a room. And by this time, you can expect everyone in the room that's important are their senior management, their lawyers, their corporate compliance team, all sitting in a room. And the founders come into the room and say, right, we own 89% of the search business. Well done us, well done us. And we're making a lot of money. Well done us, well done us. And now we're going to do something fresh and new. And everyone in the room's anticipating, what is it going to be? And Larry, one of the founders of Google, says, yes, so, as you know, we make all our money from search. And today, I'd like to announce that we're going to start investing in cars that drive themselves. There was silence in the room for a few minutes. This is actually what happened. This is scripted. I've got one of my board advisors is from Google, so I know this story well. Then a brave lawyer puts up his hand and said, Larry, I just need to check on the details of this. So we're going to design cars. These cars won't have steering wheels, right? Is that how it's going to be? Yes, that's right. So when that car hits someone, we're liable. Is that right? All the corporate compliance people in the room start twitching and not looking at each other like, this is crazy, right? And then one of the corporate compliance people puts up their hand and says, I just want to check. So when that actually, just thinking this through, when that person gets hit, because there's no steering wheel, it's also our fault. So that person's also going to sue us. The driver's going to sue us. the person that was hit's going to sue us, and because we're rich, we're going to get really sued. And then there's chatter in the room. They're like, why are we doing this? What has this got to do with search? What? I don't understand. We all know what happened. Google went ahead and did build cars that drive themselves. Because they know what I know. The only way to succeed is to act like you've got nothing to lose. And as soon as you start acting like you've got something to lose, you will fail. And that's the key to it all. And I've got a personal story I'll quickly share with you to prove that I know this fact. Who knows this guy? Bill Gates. Yeah, people say Steve Jobs. It's funny how they get mixed up. So here's a guy, to illustrate my point. Here's a guy that was at Harvard. He dropped out of Harvard. Most people know that, right? He dropped out of Harvard. If you look back, and I've studied the records, it's fascinating. When he dropped out of Harvard, all his friends, all his peers, his family, everyone were like, what are you doing? Finish Harvard. If you finish Harvard, you're set for life. Ironic when you know how far Bill Gates is now gone, right? But that's what they're saying to him. You're set for life. Finish Harvard. Doesn't make any sense just dropping out. But we all know he acted like he'd got nothing to lose and goes out and builds the most successful software company of all time. Just listed last week, $87 billion in the bank. Right. So, and actually he's my hero. I haven't got time to go into it today, but I've got quite an interesting background on him. He's a very fascinating individual, and here's an individual that has the most powerful software company in the world, and he leaves it and goes and builds the Bill Gates Foundation that lifts 3 million people out of poverty. If you want anyone to be the richest person in the world, it's someone like this. And who loves Apple in the room? Put up your hand. Still some fans, good. Quietly over there. It used to be like that. Nowadays, it's like, I do. Right, but he saved Apple. He put $100 million into Apple in 1999. If he hadn't, it would have gone bankrupt. So if you love Apple, you've got to love him. But we all care about our image, right? So this is the problem with failure. This is the problem with even the concept of risking it all, right? Because we don't want failure. And nowadays, with search and all these things, failure can quickly be discovered as well. So it's scary, right? And so we protect our image. I'm no different. So yes, I've Googled myself. And it's something you should all do once in your life. Google yourselves. It's awesome. But the thing about this sort of thing is, we all want the right things to turn up. So when you search and Google me, you'll discover I have invested in businesses and sold them for millions. I probably wouldn't have been invited here today if I was a failure, right? So here I am, a success. I've invested in businesses and made money. I picked winners. I built companies myself from scratch. And they're all the results I want to come up because that's the image I wanted to conjure up. But what I've discovered in the 25 years of being self-employed is the most interesting people and not the ones with the perfect CVs, where every point of their life was perfectly scripted. It's the ones where behind the scenes, interesting things have happened to them. And they failed. Because that's where you learn the most, not from your successes. So I've recently been sharing this quite personal story to try and illustrate this point about failure. And so this is me. I'm 14 years old in the picture. And just for the record, that hairstyle was in fashion back then, just so you know. And white socks were also cool. So I tried to crop it, but it left a line at the top. But anyway, you guys probably don't realize whether or not your childhood is good or bad. As you get older, I think you do go back and you reflect on it. I realized I grew up in Cambridge, in England. I realized I had an amazing childhood, a really wonderful childhood, actually. And when I look back, I lived in Cambridge, which is a very international city. It wasn't until I got older that I went to a football match in Birmingham that I realized people in England swear. And I used to sit in the coffee shops in Cambridge and multi-languages going on around you, just like Hong Kong. And it shocked me when I went to other parts of England, just how different it was. But looking back, I had a wonderful childhood. But the other thing I think you don't maybe realize when you're a kid is, I didn't realize until I got older, concepts like, were my parents rich or not? As a kid, as trainers I wanted, I didn't get, or, I didn't really think about were my parents rich or not. I just thought about whether or not I got what I wanted, right, like most kids. But when I look back, I realized my parents were super wealthy. And I look back, I realize now. And one of the interesting things when I look back is, so what my parents did to make their money was, they basically did what a lot of people in Hong Kong do now, which is They bought a lot of houses in the 80s. And then those houses, they bought 3 or 4 houses. Those houses doubled, tripled in value in a year. So they bought more houses, and they doubled, tripled in value. And then basically, over the period of 10 years, my parents bought lots of houses that all doubled in value thanks to the UK economy. And then the UK economy banking system looked at the economy and said, right, we're going to do 99.9% mortgages. Sound familiar to what happened in 2008? And so my parents took advantage of this cheap money, and they borrowed against all these houses that had gone up in value and bought more houses. And I can remember around 14 years old overhearing my parents talk that at one point they had nearly 300 houses in Cambridge. And what they did was they rented those houses out, right? And as the property market was going up, people couldn't afford to buy, so a lot of people would rent. And then the rent coming in would cover the mortgage. And 25, 30-year mortgages, you're set, right? You pay that off, and then you own all those properties, have all that income. It sounds like a dream situation, right? But then, many of you are too young to remember this, but in 1990, the UK economy tanked, and the property market crashed. And they lifted the interest rates at one point to nearly 15%. I mean, in 2008, the financial tsunami then, they put interest rates down to 0, so a very different scenario. Well, actually, then people's mortgages in the UK have been cheaper than they were but before the financial crisis. But back then in the UK, they decided to cut the problem there and lifted interest rates, which meant overnight, my family wiped out. The property values dropped 50%, and then the payments were so high, they couldn't make the payments anymore, and all the people renting could suddenly afford, although the interest rates were high, they could go get a much cheaper property so they could afford to buy. So all the people moved out. So the property crash changed everything in my life. Now, my parents tried to protect me from this, but of course, by this time I'm 15, you can hear all the arguing, all the sadness. And I can remember overhearing my dad say one thing that sticks in my mind about banking, which is when a bank will give you an umbrella, and when it rains, they want it back. And so the stress of all this was so much on my family. So my father at the time couldn't take the concept of going completely bankrupt. And sadly, he died of a heart attack at 54 years old. As crazy as telling you this story is, when I look back at this time, and this is 25 years ago, I have 3 brothers, and suddenly I go home, and it was so sad I didn't want to go home anymore. And I go to school, and all my friends, we'd lost all our money, which, by the way, people treat you differently when you go to school and you've lost all your money. You had a different set of friends suddenly. When you go to school, all my friends that were my real friends were sad for me. So it was also sad at school. So I did something crazy. And at 15 years old, I moved out of home, and I moved out of school. I left school, and I moved into a garage. Now, this isn't the actual garage, just so you know. The actual garage in Cambridge that I moved into is now a hotel. But it looks very similar. So it was attached to a house, and all the rooms in the house were rented out. And so I actually had my own front door, felt very grown up. And this is actually a pretty cool garage. I've got a sofa from a friend and a bed. And it was a really cool, like, little bachelor pad at 15 years old. And I sat in that garage, and something strange happened. In all this sadness, there was almost like a silver lining to the cloud. I sat there and I thought to myself, right, what's my purpose in life? What am I meant to be doing? And I realized something. Suddenly, all the expectations on me were removed. I didn't realize. I can remember at 12 years old being asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? I said a lawyer. Do I look like a lawyer? I realized that my life had actually been mapped out for me by the people that love me. I was meant to go to Cambridge. I'd actually already been set up with an internship at a law firm. My whole life was actually planned out for me. I wasn't really making my own decisions. I wasn't consciously thinking about what it is I really want to do, what I'm meant to do. And I sat in that garage and I realized it. And I also had no pressure anymore. People telling me what I should be doing. I could just think about what it is I want to do. But very quickly I had to learn this, risk and reward. And what I did basically is I sat there after 3 days and I thought, okay, great, I'm supposed to do something else. What is it I'm supposed to do? And then I suddenly realized, shit, I've got no money. And I didn't want to go home and ask my mum for money because she didn't have any and she was sad. So I thought, crap, I've got to earn money. And I was living in Cambridge, and anyone that's been to Cambridge, there's lots of massive houses there. I had this brilliant idea. I realised that during the financial crisis, all the people that had big houses in Cambridge had to go to London to deal with the financial crisis that was going on, so they couldn't look after their gardens. So I could see a lot of the gardens in Cambridge were a little bit overgrown. Some were well kept. Anyway, so I decided this Saturday morning that I was going to go and take care of their gardens for them and start a gardening firm. And I can remember this Saturday morning, a bit like today, a beautiful sunny Saturday morning, and I went and knocked on the first big house and I said, "Hi, my name's Simon. I've got a gardening firm and I'd like to take care of your garden." And I got my first knockback. I can remember it. The guy said, "I'm very sorry, I've already got someone taking care of my garden for me." I was like, "Oh," but I did notice, I said to this guy on the way in, that some of the parts of the garden aren't very well kept. He goes, "Oh yes, frankly, he's not a very good gardener." I was like, "Oh right, well maybe you can give me a chance to do it for you." He's like, "Sure. How much do you charge?" I was like, "Well, how much is your present gardener charging you?" He's like, £200 a month. I was like, "I'll do it for 150. He's like, "All right, I'll give you a try." So I turned that negative into positive and got the order. And then I went to the next house and knocked on the door and I said, "Hi, my name's Simon. I've got a gardening firm. I'd like to take care of your garden." He goes, "Oh, I'm glad you contacted me because I really haven't got time to take care of my garden and I need someone to do it. And I was actually going to contact the guy doing the garden next door, but I haven't had time. Are you doing the garden next door?" I'm like, "Yes, I'm doing the garden next door." Yes. He's like, "Right, okay, great. So, how much do you charge?" I'm like, £200 a month. I was like, "Great." And that first Saturday, I managed to get 9 people signed up to my gardening firm. And I remember going home that Saturday night, very pleased with myself, and sitting there talking with all the other people, because we had a communal area where all the people were renting rooms in the house, we'd all kind of eat together. And I remember talking to them about, "I've got 9 people, this is how much, it costs loads of money," which is a huge amount of money to me back then. And I was very excited. And then someone at the table said to me, "But you don't have any gardening equipment." It's like, good point. So I went to bed that night thinking, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" And I woke up the Sunday morning and I had this brainwave. So I drew up the worst handmade contract you've ever seen in your life. And I knocked on the door that I knocked on the previous day and I said, "Hi, yesterday you kindly confirmed that I was going to be your gardening firm. And I've listed out all the things I'm going to do. I wonder if you wouldn't mind signing it and giving me a 50% deposit." And the guy took the contract, went, "Sure," signed it and gave me the money. And I remember thinking at the time, I don't have a registered company, they don't know who the hell I am, and all 9 people gave me the cash. It blew my mind. Now, I look back and I realised these guys, probably that's the cost of parking their car in London for an hour, like to them it was probably nothing. But for them to give it, well, I feel I was a stranger to them, cash. But then what was great is I had the money to go home and then go and buy the stuff that I needed to do the work, right? Anyone that shakes my hand, you'll realise I've actually never done a hard day's work in my life except this one day. So I went, and anyone thinking of doing a gardening firm, bit of advice, buy a sit-on lawnmower. Don't buy a push lawnmower like I did, right? First day, the following Saturday, I did my first day's hard work in my life, and frankly, my last hard day's work in my life. And I started actually cutting the grass. Oh my God. It was so much work doing these gardens, and I realised I was probably undercharging. And I went home that Saturday night, very different to the Saturday night previous where I was boasting about all these orders I got, and I sat with the people in the room and I started to complain about the work. And then one person there said to me, "Wow, that's, maybe I could help you with that though, Simon. One of them was a trucker, so he was driving during the week, quite big, so I could do the work at the weekends and get fit at the same time." I'm like, "Awesome, yeah, maybe you could." And he said, "Well, how much will you pay me?" I'm like, "Well, maybe I could give you £25 cash if you help me the weekends." Like, "I'll do it." And I suddenly realised all these people around me needed some extra work. So I asked them all, "Do you want some extra work?" And basically, by the end of Saturday, although I'd done my first day's hard work, by Saturday night, I talked to them all about outsourcing Sunday's work to them. And I sat at home playing Sega Mega Drive while they went out and did all the work. The entrepreneurial dream. So that's basically what I did. But one of the things, it took me 7 years, I'm quite blunt about this, I'm not a materialistic person, but I think for young people it does help to say something like this. It took me 7 years before I first made my £1 million cash. I saw it sitting in the bank. 7 years. But I can tell you, during that 7 years, I made a lot of mistakes. I built the company too quickly. I actually sold part of the company in one region to someone and made a big mistake. I brought in a partner. All of these things you're going to talk about here. I had an exit. I started another company. I made so many mistakes. All of these things. I made them all over and over again. But that's why I'm now successful, frankly speaking. Because you've got to make those mistakes to learn how it works. And so, yes, you can also get taught. You can have people come in and tell you some of these things, and I think that's also helpful. But you've also got to go out there and act like you've got nothing to lose and give yourself the freedom to fail. I sometimes say this is the gift my father gave to me. But this is a gift you can give to yourself. You have to hold it close. Give yourself the freedom to fail and act like you've got nothing to lose. So this goes on a bit, so I'll cut it short, but a lot of people might tell you, I actually think starting a business in Hong Kong is a good idea. I know some of you are not from Hong Kong, but there's lots of reasons. A lot of people might tell you if you're going to get into, say, a .com or you're going to do a startup, as soon as you say startup, the older generation go, oh yes, overvalued, and .com all over again, and just to help you if that does happen and you do decide to do a startup. It's a very different time now, right? I don't know if you guys ever read Michael Gladwell's books, but in one of his books he talks about how the most experienced people often make the most amount of mistakes. He particularly cites pilots. It's all the older pilots that have the most amount of accidents because they get very jaded. They're very like, oh, you know, there's an example, there's ice on the wing, and the experienced pilot's like, oh, it's always like that. And then this one time the plane takes off, they didn't follow protocol and take the ice off the wing and the plane crashes, right? So sometimes experience can work against you, and I think sometimes when people are talking about startups, a lot of the older generation have still got the bubble in their mind, and they don't realize that times have changed. So in 1999, there was 250 million internet users. By 2015, there are now nearly 3 billion. Companies like LinkedIn are doing 4 times more than they said they would profit-wise from their IPO. So times are different. Bear that in mind when people start telling you, oh, go work for a bank. So yeah, I've actually got a video, but I don't know how to make it work on PC, and I think my time might be up. So in the end, guys, I think it's important to remember to do something that means something to you. And in my opinion, the purpose of life is a life with purpose. Whatever you do, you're going to need to apply these things, but make sure it's something that means something to you. Thanks very much. What we're always looking for is the practical and the impractical. So the practical would be an idea that really is a problem that needs solving. For example, it really is something there that's legitimate and serious. So that's kind of the practical side, right? And hopefully they've got some sort of projection on their burn rate, who they need to hire, what they're going to do in the next 100 days or 12 months to grow the company, right? So that's the practical. The impractical side, it's always good if there is actually a story behind the idea. So we just invested in a company called Play2. This company basically pitches games that are good for you. The people behind it are ex-Guitar Hero developers from EA. And they've basically come up with a series of games, and one of them, you play it, and it basically helps you learn to focus better, because actually how do you train yourself to focus? And one side effect of that is it fixes ADD, which in America is a $4 billion a year drug expense for people who have kids with ADD. They have to take these drugs, and these drugs have horrible side effects, right? And the story behind it is one of the guys who's developed it, his child has ADD. It's very personal to him. So he's built something that's, I think, relevant. He's built something that actually solves a problem, a major one, and can disrupt an industry, the pharmaceutical industry, but it's personal to him. So that's the kind of impractical stuff that I personally look for when people are pitching, something that ties it back to, it's not just I'm going to do Facebook in China, and you can make money doing this, by the way, Facebook in China, but it's going to be green, and we're going to follow what the Chinese government tells us to do. And so, yeah, you can. That's not a bad idea, but it doesn't. Where's the passion to it? 'Cause 3 years later, you're still doing it. Is it you just hoping that Facebook would buy you, or you are hoping, you know what I mean? Whereas if it's personal, like that game to that person, he's fixing ADD, right? A problem that's affected him and his family. So he's passionate about solving that problem for other people, and it won't matter if he never makes money. He'll still keep going. So that's quite an intangible thing. And that's why we always say, yeah, like you said on our website, that we're investing in the people first and the idea second, because everyone's got an idea.
But do you think the passion would really lead to success, or will it be some kind of a subjective aspect that could actually lead the business to go in the wrong direction?
Yeah, I mean, there's always that danger, the kind of the line between passion and psycho, right? So it's you've got to get that balance right where you're, and a lot of people are obsessed with money. That's another, in a way, a red flag. I mean, everyone wants to make money, everyone likes money, but that shouldn't be your purpose, right? So focusing on things that are more important. Like Mark Zuckerberg today apparently has $21 billion in the bank. And one of the reasons he has $21 billion in the bank is that he turned down $1 billion from Yahoo when they offered to buy his company. And then 3 weeks later, MTV offered him $1.5 billion and he turned it down, right? because he was passionate. He believed that this idea was important to him. He wanted to connect the world, right? So that's why, you know, he's successful today, because he didn't sell out, right? You get what I mean?
Cool, thank you.
Sure.
Group two. One per group. We do around.
Oh, it's one question.
One, and then we come back.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
I want to ask, nowadays when we're going to trying to find the money and try just in terms of funding capital, there are mainly two ways. The first way is from the banks or some private investor which, who is very rich, and the second way could be from the public, right? I like IPO or the other things. When compared with these two methods, so I would like to ask what is the advantage and also the disadvantage of these two methods, and where we are going to collect capitals for a different nature of business.
Okay, you're group two, right? Finding the money.
Yes.
That's a very relevant question then, isn't it?
Thank you.
Okay, just so it's clear, the process generally for most new companies now, today's world, is family and friends first. So, you know, you have an idea and you ask your brother or your sister or your mum or your dad or, you know, a business partner to, you know, join you and put a little bit of money in to get the idea up and running, right? So it's family and friends. And then traditionally, if it's a business that can make money from day one, which is very rare these days, you could go to a bank, but that doesn't exist anymore, by the way, and try and get an SME loan, but it's next to impossible if you don't already have capital. So now that gap's filled by angel investors. Okay, which is what I used to be. I am still, but I've now built a platform called Nest, which is actually it's like angel investors, and then you have consortiums. So consortiums like Nest, accelerators. So a network that helps you get funding, helps you get contacts, helps you build the business, helps you get revenue, right? It's now called acceleration. So family and friends, angel investors, accelerators, growth funds. So these are starting to be institutional organizations like Sequoia, Dole Capital, these are very famous ones in the US, and they give you growth capital, Series A capital, so these, you know, large sums of money to then scale it again, and then Series B, Series C investment, and Series B and Series C investment, often you're already working, you're on your way to IPO, and they're going to fund you to get to IPO, and then you have IPO. Okay, so LinkedIn is an example of a business that's gone from zero to hero. Year one they get family and friends. Year two, they get angel investors. Year three, they get Sequoias, Dole Capital, big, and then 10 years later, they IPO. Right? So that's generally the process. But one thing that's changed in the last few years is around Series B, Series C, you can get trade exits. So think about Facebook buying WhatsApp for 19 billion, 10% of their market cap. Right? Think about, you know, Instagram losing $8 million a month. Sold for $1.4 billion. Right. So instead of raising money, you can just be bought by Google, which are the biggest buyer of startups today, or Facebook or one of these companies, and then they pay you a lot of money, plus they plug you into their network, right? So you can scale your business quicker. So that's the process. When your question about what's better and what's not better, I think investing is very important to get the money from the right people. That's my view. So you try to get people that are experienced in your industry. I actually think families and friend investment can be quite dangerous because it's personal. So if the business goes wrong, you've got to sit with them on Sunday lunch, and you know, it could be awkward, right? Plus, sometimes family, they don't necessarily have the skill set needed to help you. They might not understand your business. They might have an opinion. If they put money in, they might have a very strong opinion. So it can backfire. I've seen that happen quite a lot. Family and friend money, but like family and friend money, angel money. Investment from something like my firm, you just got to make sure they're the right investor for you. Don't rush after the money. Make sure you've got to know the investor and they're clear on your vision and they buy into it. And you know, if your idea is not necessarily, say it's an education startup and you just want to help people learn to read in developing countries, right? Well, the mission isn't to make lots of money then, is it? So the investors coming in need to see that. They can't see, where's my return 6 months later when you're building a business that's 10 years to build. You get what I mean? So I don't know if that's a helpful answer, but you've got to really be careful of the sort of money you bring in. And every cycle, it's important to try and follow the stages. Some people try to jump straight to Series A, and sometimes that means they've raised too much money too quickly, which might sound strange, but then they find it later harder to raise money again because they haven't got any growth, or the valuation was too high when they raised the last round. They can't raise money now because no one wants a down round from the last investment. So ironically, don't raise too much too quickly. So that's the advice I can give you on that cycle. Hopefully it makes sense. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Useful?
Yes.
Good.
Hi Simon,
Hi.
nice to meet you and nice you're having me. I was thinking to ask a question about equity sharing between like being invested and being an investor and startup. How do you, as a beginner, define like a good deal in this? It's maybe a difficult question to answer.
No, it's a good question. Not that difficult. The valuation really is what you're talking about, right? I mean, ultimately you're talking about what is the value of a company that's in your head. What's the value of a company when you've got 3 people and a product out in the market? What's the value, right? And so therefore, what would equity be if you brought in an investor, or what percentage, who gets what, right? So it's quite messy. There are a lot of case studies out there, hugely different varieties. So Rupert Murdoch, for example, actually only owns 16% of his company, right? Which, if I told you, start a company today and you're only going to have 16% of it, you'd be like, doesn't sound right, right? So in the end, it's really about owning 5% of Facebook, not 51% of MySpace, right? So percentages are a little bit irrelevant. I think it's really about, back to this point about purpose, right? Are you enjoying it? Is it making an impact? Is it following through on a mission that's important to you? When it comes to selling equity to investors, again, it's really to do with the value proposition of those investors. So we were just having this conversation earlier about how we invest. So what we say is we're going to take between 5 and 10% of your company for approximately 150,000 to 200,000 US, and then we're going to help you. And I've got 11 full-time people that help the startups, right? So then, what's that worth to the startup? They might say, well, no, my company, 10% of my company right now is $1 billion. So no, that's, not. And other people say, wow, that's awesome, we'll take the money and thank you very much. So I think a lot of it depends on the individual. But what I've learned, every single deal I've done in the last 25 years is based on these 3 points. First, do we get on? So the investors, anyone taking equity in your company, anyone you're giving equity to, if you don't get on, you fall over. There's no point. Second, every single deal I've done follows these 3 rules. Second, do we need each other? So the investor, I can tell you as an investor, actually I need good companies to invest in. Otherwise I've got to go get a real job, right? So I need companies to invest in so I can deploy capital, so I can eventually make a return and have a business of legitimacy. And equally, hopefully the person selling equity needs an investor that can help them. An investor that can bring capital, yes, but can also help them, right? So they need me, I need them. You get those 2 points right. The third one I found always falls into place. And the third one is the financial element of it. So how much is the shares worth? But I've discovered you get the first 2 right out of these 3. The third one, you always figure it out. We need each other. We like each other. We've got to figure it out, right? And the third one always gets sorted out. Useful?
Yeah, good answer.
Group
Good.
4.
Hi Simon, nice to meet you. We want to ask you that you have mentioned you need to exit a few companies during your career, and so we want to ask you, when would you see a critical point that you need to exit?
Exit is one of my least favorite words from a business building perspective, because you might be surprised to hear that from an investor, right? Because the thing with exit is that if you rush for the exit, you're not enjoying the journey. So I always caution startup founders, yes, as an investor, I need an exit, right? But don't let that be your mission. As a founder, your mission is to build a brilliant company, to build a company you're proud of, to build something that makes a difference in the world, right? But my mission might be to exit, but it shouldn't be yours, actually. It's a dangerous thing if you think. So I've heard people, again, come to me, I've seen this idea in Europe, and I'm going to copy it here, and then I'm going to sell it in 2 years and make a fortune. I'm like, again, it does work sometimes, but what if you're stuck with that business? You're not passionate about it, you don't love it. So exit is a very dangerous word to throw around too much. But when it comes to exit, my experience has been, you tend to, trade exits, the process I was just talking about earlier, trade exits tend to be based on relationships, and your business is a good fit with someone else's business. So what you don't want to do is sell your business to Yahoo, for example, that might then take their business and destroy it, right? So you've got to be careful, who you sell to. And it's amazing that Mark Zuckerberg said no to $1 billion, right? I mean, set up for life, yeah? Sold a company from zero to hero, sells it for $1 billion, set up for life, right? But he says no because he's... So getting the right exit is very important. Profiling who buys your company. So what we do at Nest when we invest in a company is we say, right, who are the possible exits for this business? So we do look at trade. We do look at people that could buy our shares of us at least. So when we're no longer useful as investors, it might be that they need an international company that can help them go global. They can buy our shares off us. So we profile who we could eventually sell our shares to. But in the markets, it's normally Sequoia, Series A, Series B, or IPO. IPO is the ultimate exit for most founders of companies, right? Because then you list it, you get some of your shares taken off the table, you put some money in your pocket, and then you have lots of money in the bank to build the business. So IPO is normally the main exit. Did I answer the question? Say yes or no, sort of. What's missing?
I don't know. I think we want to ask about it's like, is there a signal? So do you sense something that when a business is failing, and you got to think about how to maybe start anew or think about
When the business is failing.
Yeah.
Yesterday we talked a lot about failure.
Oh.
Probably was,
So you say exit when it's failing. That will never work. When a business is failing, it depends on why it's failing, right? It's a bit like a rock band. Maybe you just need to change the lead singer, or maybe you just in startup world they use this word called pivoting, right? So basically, if it's not quite working, you look at how you can change it. Groupon actually was a completely different business model originally, and they just pivoted the idea from using the technology into Groupon, and then of course it was hugely successful. So failure and exit normally don't link. Exit normally comes from successful businesses, not from failures. There are some cases where failure has been bought for the technology or for the brand name but generally, even Kodak, when it failed, no one was going to buy it, right? Even though it's a great brand. So it's, again, have I answered your question? I feel like I'm rambling.
Yes.
Yeah? Good.
back to one.
Like, how do you actually get the inspiration to start Nest investment? And is the previous failure of starting a business at your early age maybe one of the factors that inspires you to help others start a business?
Yeah. Well, I started Nest because I discovered what my purpose was. So my purpose in life is to help people unplug from the matrix. You guys all know the movie The Matrix? So a lot of people are in the matrix. Generally, if you go get a job and you work in a bank and you don't feel very fulfilled, you're in the matrix. So I've discovered my purpose is to help people unplug from that system and follow their purpose. But it took me a long time to figure out my own purpose, even though I had that time to reflect. I was saying my story earlier. It does take a long time to figure out because you have to eat, right? You have to pay the bills. So you end up falling into the system just to pay the bills. It took me a long time to have the time and the money to sit down and say, what do I want to do? And I really like helping entrepreneurs. I really like helping them think bigger, think differently, and unleash their potential, their human potential. So 4 years ago, I sat down with my wife and said, the bit of my life I really enjoy is helping the young companies, not the big corporates. So I said to my wife, I would like to take half our savings and put it into startups. And I got a very supporting wife who said no. No. A very supporting wife who said yes. And so then that's how Nest came about. Really, I just sat down and realized that I wanted to help entrepreneurs, and then luckily I got lucky. A few of the companies worked out and made money, and I can keep doing it. But when it comes to for yourselves figuring out, because you're the idea piece, right? When you guys are figuring out what it is, you should probably try to dig deep into what makes you happy, what you like to do each day. That's not the same as sitting in your comfort zone, by the way, but figuring out what it is you really like to do and then doing it. Maybe it's education. Maybe it's teaching people. Maybe it's building a device that helps people that can't see properly see again. Whatever your passion is, whatever your life has given you experience-wise, that gives you a purpose.
Group two.
Hi, Simon.
Hi.
So a lot of companies nowadays, they usually get their finance through, startup companies, they get their finance through venture capitalists. And that usually requires them giving away 40 to 60% of the company away, which is extremely expensive in the long run. So what do you think is the best way to minimize the long run costs at the same time keeping, you know, the majority equity in your company?
Okay. I think VCs don't. Yeah, you're right about giving away equity long term is a very expensive play. I think it depends on you, right? I mean, my firm, we see ourselves as VCs in a way too, but we're only taking 2 to 10%. The modern version of VCs are doing that because we know that as an entrepreneur, investing in entrepreneurs, I know you take away 40% of someone's company. It's not just that you've stripped away a lot of their value, you sometimes take away their enthusiasm too. So the smarter VC firms are wising up to this, and they're tending to do things like convertible notes, and they're tending not to take large chunks of equity like that. It still happens, but it's
Speaking of Dragon's Den as well.
yeah. Well, Dragon's Den is an interesting phenomenon.
Can you explain it for?
Right. So who knows Dragon's Den here? Put up your hand. You must know it. You just mentioned it.
Well,
Oh, there you go. Just help me out because there's only 2 people put their hands up. So basically, it's a show on the BBC. Don't watch the Canadian version because it's rubbish, but the BBC version is awesome. Where you've got Shark Tank. You've got 4 investors. People come in and pitch their ideas, and then people invest in them on the spot. But the truth is that's television, and the truth is you'll look at it. If you look at it even now from the first episode, they're tending to take less equity. You know, and when you get to if you look at the final deals they really do off the TV screens, they tend to be more clawbacks, and so the details missing from that TV show because they haven't got a long time. But if you look at it, I mean, sometimes we've done this. We've taken 20% of a company. The founders said it's $1 billion. We've taken 20% of the company and said, right, if it is $1 billion, then we'll give you back 15%, right? It's okay. You know, if it's not $1 billion, then so there's another way to negotiate that because a lot of people will say, oh, my idea is worth $1 billion, right? And you're like, okay, it could be worth nothing. So sometimes equity can be used as a KPI. So you make this company a $1 billion company, then we're happy to give you back 19% of the company that if we took 20. But if you don't make it and it only becomes what we think is going to be a $100 million company, then 20% is fair, right? For our X investment and time. So, but go back to my point about just be careful about the investors that you bring in. Spend time getting to know who they are, profile how they can really help you. A lot of investors will say they can help you and they can't. So make sure they've got a background in your industry, in your sector. Make sure that they can really help. I mean, again, I'm happy to give 30% away of Nest right now to someone that can help me take, the 46 companies we've invested in and make sure they all succeed. I'll be very happy to give, large chunks of equity away if people can guarantee those sorts of things, right? So it's all about how they can help what you're trying to achieve, right?
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
A lot of the times as well, companies or venture capitalists require you to have some kind of a number of sales in order for you to, present it to them. Is it possible to sell your idea to a venture capitalist just based on a good idea without any sales whatsoever? Is that is that realistic?
It's realistic. It happens. It's less likely, but it can happen. That's why businesses like mine now exist, to fill the gap between the family and friends and those more institutional VCs, because they have, often they're funds, those VCs are funds, right? When fund structures often are very rigid. They're like, must have 1 million users, must be B2B, must be this, must be that, right? They have, must be Android. I've seen funds that are just focused on Android mobile games with 5 million users. So sometimes what you need to do is understand those VCs and then wait until you've got it to the point where they're ready to invest in it. Some people want to, as I said earlier, get straight to raising $50 million when they have just from an idea. Well, who wouldn't want $50 million sitting in the bank, right? But in reality, you've got to go through a process to scale it up. And so my suggestion is, if you don't have the tick boxes for those big firms yet done, it's going to be a lot more work for you to try and pitch them something much earlier. So go into an accelerator or raise angel investment, raise accelerator investment, and get it to a point where it's a much quicker conversation as well. I mean, I've sat in a room with these larger VCs and you just say, this is what we've done. We know this is your criteria. Would you like to invest? They say yes. Paperwork's done by the end of the day. Or you can go in there and go, well, we will get there, we will do this. And they talk about, we've got to go tell our investors that we're going to go in early stage. And they could lose their jobs if it doesn't work, So it just becomes a 4-month conversation instead of a 1-hour conversation. Sure.
After we do a round, you come back up. Fred.
Hi, Simon.
Hi.
In a place like Hong Kong, do you still think that people are sometimes reluctant to invest in startups? They're seen as they still might go for like investing in property markets and stuff like that. And but do you see it changing in the next few years? Do you think people would be more confident in investing in startups, like tech startups and stuff in Hong Kong, instead of just always focusing on property and stuff?
Okay, your subconscious is telling you people in Hong Kong only invest in property because that's all you know, because it's very surface, you can see it, right? I can tell you there's so many people with capital here investing in startups. It's flooded. The key to it all is having a good idea, of course. And actually, if you go to the US, you talk to some people that are, oh, people are buying property in the US, that's all they have, property. Stocks, people just buy stocks. So, you know, yes, maybe you go to Silicon Valley and you'll suddenly hit a higher amount of people that will say they're investing in startups. But truth be told, people are investing in all sorts of things all the time, all over the world, in all sorts of different categories, right? But there's a huge interest in startups. There's a huge interest for lots of reasons. One, it's quite enjoyable. So if you've got money and you invest in a startup, it's a lot more rewarding than buying a car park, right? So, you know, a lot of the time, investment is also about pulling on the heartstrings of investors. So yes, however, I made 20 times my money on one of my startups, and I'm never going to get that out of property. And I've also invested in a property. Yes, it's gone up in value, but not 20 times. So it depends on your risk profile. If you look at most people's portfolios, they will spread their risk, right? And they'll do stocks, and they'll do Lehman Brothers, right? They'll do property, right? So, but the truth is, all of it has risk. And my view, and this is what I say to a lot of my friends who have money that haven't yet started investing in startups, is if I invest in a startup, actually, it's much better than I invest in stocks. If I invest in stocks and some moron decides to lie on his accounts or do this and do that, I've got no control and I lose all my money, right? Whereas if I invest in a startup and if I believe in myself, I'm helping that startup, much higher chance I'm going to get my money back, right? Whereas I invest in some guy or Lehman's, I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes, right? Shredding bits of paper and hiding their accounts, right? So I then lose all my money. So that's heavily regulated, but I still lose all my money, right? So the risk profile is meant to be zero, but actually the risk profile is very high. Same in property. You look at property now, I think property is a very dangerous risk profile right now. Interest rates go up in the US, everyone here has got 2 or 3 properties, won't be able to afford exactly what I just said about my own family, right? Won't be able to afford. China, look at one change in the regulation, one politician gets caught fraud owning 50 houses in Beijing, suddenly everyone's offloading their property in Beijing because they're scared they're going to get clobbered with corruption scandals, right? So, wow, property suddenly, so it's very, it sounds not risky, but everything you invest in is risky, and you'll find that a lot of people in Asia now are starting to invest in startups, me included. So it's there. But you might think that US has more people that will do it. It's just they have more success stories, so you hear about it more, that's all. You're welcome.
So, hi Simon.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, where did you decided to move on after the exit? Do you want to go on pursuing other fields, or do you want to stay in this area?
You mean exit for Nest? I'm not exiting Nest, I love it.
Or your former exit?
Oh, so do you mean like, so when I exit a company, what happens, or?
What would you move on to do? Do you want to pursue in other fields, or do you want to stay in the same field?
Okay. Well, for me, my journey, you know, without going into too much detail, but, you know, I started a gardening firm, right, which couldn't be further away from what I'm doing today. And, you know, I exited that, and then I actually bought another gardening firm. And then I exited that, and then I actually got into the hotel business, and then sold my shares in that. And then, then I basically, when I moved to Hong Kong, I started an agency business, and I sold shares in that. I actually still own a large chunk of that business. Because it helps the startups that I'm involved in, but someone else runs it. So I personally like to go and do different things. And right now, investing in startups, to me, I think I've actually found what I'm quite happy to do until I die. All I need to do is make sure that those startups succeed, and I can do it until I die. But when the startups exit, it's an interesting process. So for me, I've exited and then moved on to do other things based on, you know, that reflection point. But for some of the companies I've invested in, so for example, I invested in a comic book company that we sold to NBC Universal. But the people behind the comic book company, I was an investor and also helping operations. They're still in that company. They love making IP. They love making comic books. So those other founders are still in that business. I'm not in it anymore, but I'm, you know, but they're still in it. So sometimes, like I'm saying, with Mark Zuckerberg, he could have sold it to Yahoo. They wouldn't have got rid of him, probably. You know, if he'd sold it to MTV 3 weeks later, like I mentioned earlier, they wouldn't have got rid of him. Maybe he would have stayed. You have the option to exit. But most founders that get exits, ironically, love what they're doing. They tend not to leave the company. generally speaking. But that's not always the case.
Last round of questions, and then we open to everyone. Good one.
So, just another question. You started with a gardening company. However, now the startup landscape is more about tech startups. You know, even the most famous startups we hear are more in the tech sector. What do you think the reason for this shift, or is it because these non-technological startups are not appealing for investors, or those things doesn't have the potential to succeed? As one of us are interested in, that's something like non-tech.
Yep.
You have 1 hour.
Yeah, it's a complicated one. Do you have any water? Just think of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, thanks. Again, you're hearing a lot about tech companies. So you automatically assume that that's the sector that people are investing in. But there's a lot of stuff, for example, going on. See, tech is an interesting term. In my opinion, tech is a very 1990s term. Right? I don't think tech actually is the right term anymore for that sector because, well, I know what you mean. But what I'm trying to say is that. So, for example, last week I was reading about in the Financial Times about Burberry, right? It's a retailer, right? But they're talking about them and being a tech company. So, Jeff, Amazon CEO, just bought the Washington Post, and suddenly they're calling the Washington Post a tech company, right? So if you look at the trends, everything's becoming tech. Everyone wants to do some element, an app or e-commerce, or retailers trying to do online, and it's all getting merged into one. So it's all. But the thing about tech from an investor's perspective, I mean, generally anything that you can put online, it can go global, right? See, once you see things like Instagram, build it in a little room in Silicon Valley, and the whole world's using it. Which there's not many industries that are like that. But you look at Starbucks, for example, and that's quite a famous, successful business, not tech at all, right? And had a lot of investors investing in it, and it's $1 billion company. So it's not just tech out there that's getting investors and getting success. There's a lot of businesses that are in all sorts of categories that are nothing to do with tech. But in the end, like I just invested in a drone company, for example, that its pitch is basically solving world hunger. And what they've developed is a piece of technology that actually attaches itself to the drone, flies over farmland, and analyzes the farmland. And on average, there's an additional 20% yield you can get out of every single piece of farmland in China. They just don't know what to do to make it more. So too much irrigation one side and not enough. So this drone flies over it, analyzes it every day, and then tells the farmer what he to do to get 20% more yield out of it. And if you get 20% more yield out of it, that's a huge amount of additional food to literally solve world hunger in places like China, right? So. But it's a tech company, but the people behind it, there's actually quite a lot of manual work too. So actually analysing it, there's a lot of agricultural individuals in that organisation that will analyse the data that comes in and then make predictions. So technology meets a trained individual that understands agriculture. You get what I mean? So, but of course, investors, to answer your question, investors will invest in tech because it's scalable. If you put tech in there, slide it in there, and suddenly you can get 10, 20 times valuation. If you're a retailer, people think, oh my God, rents and distribution networks and supply chain, and oh wow, sounds like a lot of time and trouble, And so.
Just on that. So the main reason is that if it's non-tech, doesn't have something that is scalable and something that can increase the value very quickly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, so for my agency business, for example, I could build it without any investors. And so you win a client, they pay you a lot of money, great, you hire more people. And so you don't need, a lot of the companies that aren't tech, you don't need a lot of capital. And frankly, if I give you capital, I want 20 times return. If you're opening up Starbucks, that's going to be quite hard to get that. It's going to be 20 years before you get me that, right? Whereas if you're building an app and it goes global and people are, downloading it like Flappy Bird or whatever, downloading it all the time and making $1 every time, I can quickly get my money back, right? So that's why tech ends up being so popular with investors. But that doesn't mean to say everyone should focus on tech. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. From the current trend of funding, getting the money, what do you think is the future of finding money for startups, and also, which region do you think has the highest potential in the coming future?
Question that almost like I felt I planted you in the audience, because this is the sort of question I like to answer because I can pitch my own businesses. So I mentioned earlier I've invested in a crowdfunding product called Investable. And so what you have is you have investors one side with lots of money and no ideas and not the energy to execute ideas either. And then the other side you have hardworking, smart startups looking for money. So I think that's the future. This is all online. So you go on, you put your startup on one side, and then you, as an investor, I'm on to looking for those startups, right? So I think that's the future, personally. There's an example of Oculus. You know Oculus, this 3D glasses thing. So basically what they did a Kickstarter campaign. So people went online, people loved the product, they bought it. So they gave them the money then to go and actually make the product, right? So you don't need to raise the money to make the product and then go out and put it. What Henry Ford used to have to do was make a car, build a factory, make a car, put it out on the streets, and then hope people buy it. Luckily, he was right. People did. But you don't need to do that anymore. Now, you can go online with something like Oculus, say, this is what I'm thinking of doing. People then pledge, you get market validation. They say, yes, I'll buy it. They then get the money. Then they can go and make it, and then they've already got the customers set up and done, right? So that's definitely the future. And what I think is going to be big is this whole concept of peer-to-peer lending. So instead of just buying Oculus, as people did on Kickstarter, what I want to do is buy Oculus and buy 1% of the company. Because 4 months after I bought Oculus on Kickstarter, it sold for 2.3 billion. Because I bought your product and validated it, you just made 2.3 billion. I want 1% of that. I was one of your early supporters. So to me, that's the future, right? I'll buy a product and get a chance to take a little equity in the company. And that's why I've invested in this product called Investable, because it does just that. It allows people to buy the product, but also buy into the company if they think it's going to be a big success. And then your other question, sorry, about markets. Again, I'm biased. Before I did Nest, I went to Silicon Valley. I love that part of the world, California. It's so lovely. I wanted to move there. I would have loved to move there. What a great place. But when I got there, I realized that it was quite saturated with a lot of bullshit, right? There were a lot of great ideas and a lot of great investors, but there's also a lot of crap, right? It seems to attract everything and everyone, which is good and bad. But that means that it's quite a saturated market. And then when I looked, and then I thought, okay, so I'm not going to start in the US. I'm a nobody there. Then I'm not going to get access to the good deals. The good deals that do come through are ridiculous valuations. So forget the US. And then I went to Singapore, who were offering me money to go and set up there, which sounds quite appealing, right? Free office space, no tax. So I looked at it, and then I realized, government's getting involved in the startup scene there, creates fake valuations. A lot of people have figured out how to fill out the forms to get the government money. And the government money says things like, you must operate for 2 years and hire 3 people. Well, startups, I'm telling you, 3 months, it works or it doesn't, and then we do something else. You've got to stick it out for 2 years for the sake of it. It didn't make sense to me to be in Singapore. I didn't feel like the ethos was quite right, although they made a great environment for people like me to go there. The actual businesses themselves were, a lot of accountants had filled out the paperwork quite well, right? And then I went to China, which of course, Shanghai, Beijing. I don't mind living, especially Shanghai. It's a nice part of the world, but the interesting part of the world. But the dynamic there is just weird. Everyone's copying everyone. It's random. You just doesn't feel like you can trust. There's no integrity yet there in the system. And it felt like every idea was just ridiculous. Everyone wants to be Jack Ma, right? You're like, okay. But anyway, so I decided. And plus, inside China, ownership, firewall. A lot of people are isolated in China. You start talking about internet ideas. They've never been on Facebook. Some people, they don't really know what their competition is. They just have so. I decided not, and I came back full circle to Hong Kong. And what's great about this market, it's got some real benefits. First of all, transparent banking system. So as an investor, I can put my money in and get my money out. China, that's a nightmare. Put your money in, you can't get your money out. Right? And you can actually see what's going on. There's no, weird rules about money in, money out. Ownership is pretty straightforward. I can register a company and I can own 5% as a foreigner. It's no big deal. It's all transparent and easy. Setting up a company is really easy. And then the other big thing about Hong Kong is there's huge amounts of capital sitting here. The people who are ready to deploy into your company. And then you've got a lot of very connected, very smart people living here. So if you're doing a fintech idea, a banking idea, I can think of, on our system, I've got 20 people at least who are high up in the banking sector that can help you. There's a lot of brain power out here. The banks have bought them out, for example. You want help in your education startup or your banking startup, they're here. They're smart people. They're sitting right here, and they can help you. And so, and here, you know, Silicon Valley, 7 million people, Hong Kong, 7 million people. We're not building a business for Silicon Valley. We're not building a business for Hong Kong, right? But this has multicultural teams from day one. Look at this room. So most of the startups I'm invested in are 3 or 4 different nationalities from day one. They're thinking global from day one. Even companies in the US tend to be American teams thinking about American market. Whereas Hong Kong, I found, has to think global from day one, which is a real advantage now that as the world gets smaller. So for all those reasons, I actually genuinely think Hong Kong has a real advantage for the early stage businesses. Later stage, you need to be, you know, China or Europe or America, yes. But in the beginning, it's a great test market. 51 million visitors to Hong Kong in the last 12 months, which to some of the local people is a bit annoying. We perhaps need to build more toilets. But actually, as a test market, it's awesome. I mean, Silicon Valley only had 2.5 million visitors in the last 12 months. So as a test market, Hong Kong's awesome. High mobile phone penetration, 2.3 mobile phones per person or something like that. You know, so early adoption of technology, you know, it's just a great place to test stuff out and build a team and raise capital in the early stages. So to answer your question, ironically, Hong Kong's the best place.
Should do a video for a Chamber of Commerce because it was
Exactly.
an amazing pitch.
Yeah, it's absolutely right.
Guys,
So.
Hi Simon. We're building a social network to connect entrepreneurs all over the world. We're seeing it as a big like a start of a lot of startup scenes all over the world, which is quite still isolated. But we want to connect them on the platform, and we see that like most of these ideas that come up, you know, like a lot of the investors sometimes put a certain barrier on innovation, a certain you know, because they're at stake, of course. So like for us, like for this, you know, quick idea, quick pitch. So what can you recommend the best way to get funded by an external source at this point? I feel like, yeah, we've heard, you know, the Kickstarter, but yeah, like we're just looking at, like, you know, external sources. Like, well, when do we know when this is a good one? When do we? Because yeah, there's a lot of investors out there, a lot of ideas as well. But when is the? Yeah. A lot of things to.
Yeah. So what you're asking is when and how to get investors?
Yeah, and also like more the restriction on innovation sometimes. You know, like.
So what do you mean by restriction on innovation?
But sometimes maybe like because their money is in it, they start to put their own ideas in. You know, the entrepreneurs because they're pretty much the creative people. So.
You mean they're interfering? Interfering. Okay. Yeah, that goes back to my point earlier. I think I was saying to the other team, you know, get the right investors. And maybe if you're being honest about it yourselves, you're not quite sure your own idea. So what happens is you might say to someone like me, you might say, well, what should we do? And if you give me that window, I'm going to tell you, right? And if you don't listen to me, I'm going to feel undervalued. So make sure you're careful about who you ask for advice from. And if you don't want advice, you better be straight up about to the investor. Say, we know exactly what we're doing. This is what we're going to do. You in or you're out. And we'd like your help, but we're going to listen to some of it and ignore other parts. Is that all right? So really, it's about you setting the rules clear with investors from day one, right? Because initially, of course, you want them to invest, so maybe you pander to their whims and dreams. But actually, it's your dream, it's your whim. So you just need to be clear, right? You need to say to the investor from day one, this is the rules of engagement. This is what we're doing. This is the plan. You're buying into that plan. You're buying into me. You trust me? I'll get it done. You don't? Then don't invest in me. It might be hard to say it, but if you set the rules straight from day one, you'll get the right investor. If you don't say it, you're going to get people telling you what to do, and if you don't do what they tell you to do, it might as well work for them, right?
But concerning like for instance, like we build a platform, if we like do it like an action on a crowdfunding basis, is that not a problem in the future? Like the investors will be willing to have their money back. So how do you?
It all depends on the rules. It depends on the rules that you set for the crowdfunding, right?
Yeah.
So if you're saying, look, we need to raise the seed money, let's just take a scenario where you say, we'll raise the seed money, and this is what we're going to do, and then we're going to get money from an institution once we've got traction and users and revenue, and then at that point, all you seed investors will get an exit. Okay, that's the rules. So it's like we're expecting a 5 times return over the next 18 months, right? Or if you don't set those rules, it's just open-ended. Yeah, you could run into trouble later where you can't get rid of those investors. That's why you've got to get the paperwork right. You know, you've got to make sure you set the rules clearly. You know, there's something called drag along, tag along, which basically means if you sell the company, those people have to sell as well. You know, so you just got to make sure you put these rules in place that protect you. So, but crowdfunding is not for everyone either. I mean, especially the Kickstarter model. generally it leans quite heavily towards a product-based business, right? So I think what you're talking about is a platform. So it's not like you're giving them a free bowl, salad or something. You know what I mean? It's not like you're giving them a watch or something. So you've got to be careful that you raise the money from the right sort of people. And if you can, don't raise money from anyone. Just try and build something, get it out there and play with it. And the longer you don't have an investor, the better, really. Unless you huge competition, you've got to ramp it up, and getting investors at the right time is important.
Group 4. Guys.
So they know I don't like the word exit, so they're scared to talk now.
If not, we open to the 3 questions. If there are any. Open. Guys, other questions on anything, your idea, your topic? Something else you want to ask Simon? Otherwise, we see the video. We're on perfect timing because we still have 6 minutes more. The video is free, so yeah.
Just a quick question, Simon. When you had your gardening business, because I'm doing this, but they're not really talking tech, so I'm quite interested in non-tech startups. So can you tell us a little bit about, apart from that initial 50% payment you got, how did you manage to financially sustain your business? You know, not having family money and you not having a job, things like that.
Well, it was quite simple. Actually, ironically, I think some of the best businesses aren't the ones that have to raise $50 million and you're never sure when you're going to make revenue. I mean, that's they call them unicorns, right? I mean, they're very hard businesses to get off the ground. I actually like businesses that are quite practical. So, businesses like the gardening firm are pretty straightforward. It's just a question of how hard you're willing to work and hustle, and it played on my strengths quite well because I realised I'm a pretty good marketeer, so I'm pretty good at talking. So I played to my strengths, right? So then I can go convince people. So, but it was cash flow positive. I think that's one of the things that I learned quite early on, is to sell up front. It's a bit like Kickstarter today. Instead of going out and building the watch and then putting it in shops and then hoping people buy it, you can go test the market. So by knocking on the doors of those people, I realised that I got the price validation quite quickly, what the market competitive rate was. I could quickly define myself and what my competitive edge would be, and maybe it's just more eager, right? And then I could easily then get the cash flow to build the company. And that business is very cash flow positive, because once you've bought the standard equipment, the only cost is labour, right? And you can actually put the labour on an outsourcing system, so you don't have fixed costs. You only use them when you've got work, right? So I felt that was luck. If I look back, and a lot of business is luck, frankly, but I never realised how important cash flow was until I got lucky with that cash flow business. But a lot of people don't think about cash flow, so that's something, if you're going to build a business yourself, you really got to try and think about. So how can you get revenue to cover your costs? How can you keep your costs down? Which is why I think entrepreneurs should start businesses as young as possible. The truth is, at 15, 16, 17, I didn't need to own a boat. I just needed to know someone that owned a boat, right? I didn't even need to have a flash car. I just needed to have a friend who had a flash car, right? It's like you learn to keep your costs down. And, I actually slept in my office for a little while too, like, okay. You can go, of course, later if you've got family and you've got kids, and my wife's not going to sleep in my office now, that's for sure. But although it's quite a nice office. But anyway, still, point being that you got to try and keep your costs down and survive for as long as you can, build cash flow up as quickly as possible. So that those businesses, to me, there's lots of opportunities like that. The only danger is, and I would say I fell into this a little bit with the gardening firm, is you end up building a monster. If you're smart and hardworking, you can build a monster that you don't enjoy. So I really didn't like it, if I'm being honest, by the end of it, dealing with all these freelance workers. I commit to doing, we won some government contracts, right? So we were doing council housing estates. And you have commitments that you're going to cut it on a Tuesday morning at 9 and be finished by 1. And these guys wouldn't turn up. And it's government contracts, right? You spend like 6 months filling in the paperwork to win the government contract, and then you don't turn up. Those guys didn't turn up. I just used to blow my mind. And so I invested in a cafe business, same sort of concept. Beautiful cafe, brilliant infrastructure, great food, and then people would turn up with dirty shirts with the dirt on them. I'd be like, can you just wash your shirt? And people turn up the next day with dirt on them again. I'd be like, so I realised that's why I like dealing with founders of companies now, because they tend to be really ambitious and excited and passionate. So my fear with running businesses based on cash flow strength is that you can sometimes end up having a lot of outsourcing with perhaps individuals that you don't feel inspired by or you don't enjoy working with. So just be careful you don't build a business that you don't enjoy. I think I rambled a bit there. But hopefully giving you the cash flow point, I think, is probably the most valuable point.
Thank you.
You can get cash flow in tech businesses too. You can, you know, B2B tech businesses, you can actually, Salesforce, for example, will make you money from day one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.